The VIP lounge at JFK was a world apart from the chaos of the terminal. Polished marble floors reflected soft golden light from crystal lamps, and the air smelled faintly of leather and espresso. Waiters moved like shadows, their polished shoes whispering against the floor as they carried silver trays of champagne and coffee. Behind frosted glass, the noise of boarding announcements faded into a dull hum, leaving the room wrapped in the hush of privilege. Here, men in suits discussed mergers worth billions as though they were ordering lunch, and at the center of it all sat Alexander Grant. He was the kind of man people recognized even if they couldn't place his name. The sharp cut of his navy Brioni suit, the gleam of his cufflinks, the way his presence bent the air around him. He was power in human form. In his hands, a stack of reports, numbers etched in black ink that told the story of oil fields in Africa, tech startups in California, and high-rise towers being built in Dubai. His empire stretched across 3 continents, each deal signed with the ruthless efficiency that had become his signature. He read each page with the cold focus of a man who had learned long ago that hesitation cost money, and money was the only language the world truly respected. And yet, for all his wealth, Alexander was an island. He had no wife waiting at home, no children scribbling drawings that might end up pinned to his refrigerator. His calendar was full, but his life was empty. His colleagues called him precise. His rivals called him ruthless. His investors called him brilliant. But no one called him warm. He had built an empire, yes, but he had built it behind glass walls, shutting out anyone who might have softened him. He took a slow sip of his espresso, eyes flicking to the Rolex at his wrist. His private jet was already waiting, fueled and ready to take him to London for a board meeting that would decide the fate of yet another acquisition. He should have been thinking about stock prices, about closing strategies, about how his signature would once again shake the market. But something tugged at his attention. Through the wide glass window that overlooked the bustling terminal, his eyes caught on a shape. A figure, small and still, almost lost in the movement of the crowd. He blinked, thinking it was nothing, just another traveler trying to find a few minutes of rest in a place where rest was a luxury. But as his gaze lingered, the shape sharpened into something that unsettled him. A woman hunched against the wall near Gate 17. Her coat was thin, fraying at the edges, as though it had seen too many winters. A blanket, no more than a faded piece of cloth, was spread beneath her. 2 children lay curled against her sides, their heads resting in her lap, their faces hidden but small enough that he knew, without question, they were young. She wasn't waiting to board. She wasn't reading a ticket or scrolling on her phone. She was simply surviving. Alexander felt his chest tighten, a sensation so rare it startled him. He was used to boardrooms and battles of ego, not scenes like this. He told himself to look away, to focus on the numbers that had never betrayed him. But his eyes stayed locked on the woman, the way her shoulders curved protectively around her children, the way her head tilted toward them as though even in exhaustion she refused to let go. Something inside him whispered that he knew her, though his mind insisted it was impossible. He shifted in his chair, set his espresso down untouched, and leaned closer to the glass. For the first time in years, the reports in his hand slipped from his attention. The world of billion-dollar deals blurred, and all that remained clear was that figure huddled on the floor, too familiar to ignore. Shows. Alexander Grant had spent his entire life avoiding ghosts, but tonight, in the glittering lounge of JFK Airport, one had found him. And he knew with a sinking certainty that once he stepped out of this glass cage, nothing in his carefully controlled world would ever be the same again. Alexander's reflection in the glass trembled as the crowd beyond shifted and parted. Gate 17 was alive with motion. Families tugging rolling suitcases, college kids huddling over phones, businessmen pacing as if their feet could hurry the clock. But amidst all that restless energy, the woman on the floor did not move. She was stillness itself, as though exhaustion had carved her into stone. Only the children betrayed her humanity. The slight twitch of a small hand, the soft rise and fall of their fragile chests as they slept in her lap. He stood slowly, ignoring the curious glance of a waiter who had never seen Alexander Grant abandon anything unfinished. The untouched espresso, the reports spread like treasure maps across the polished table. He left them all behind. His shoes clicked against marble, sharp, deliberate, as he made his way out of the insulated quiet of the lounge. The glass doors slid open, and the noise of the terminal crashed over him like a wave. Announcements echoed overhead, calling flights to Paris, Sao Paulo, Seoul. Children whined, rolling suitcases rattled, a man barked into his phone about missed connections. The smell of pretzels and jet fuel filled the air. For years, Alexander had existed above all this, traveling through private terminals, gliding past security like a ghost. But now he was here in the press of humanity, and each step toward Gate 17 felt like walking into a memory he wasn't ready to face. As he drew closer, her profile sharpened. Her hair was longer than he remembered, pulled back loosely with strands falling across her face. Time and struggle had carved faint lines at the corners of her eyes, but they hadn't dimmed them. Even closed in sleep, he could sense the same fire, the same quiet dignity that once lit the cold marble halls of his mansion. Rosa. The name struck him like a whisper from the past. Rosa Martinez, his former maid. She had once moved silently through his home, carrying trays, smoothing sheets, tucking warmth into corners of a house that had never known it. She had been more than her uniform. He'd known it even then. Her laughter had been rare, but when it surfaced, it softened even his mother's last painful days. Rosa had stayed up through the night when his mother's illness worsened, singing softly in Spanish, the lullabies of a world far from his own. For a brief moment in those years, Alexander had thought, though he never admitted it, that Rosa carried something into his house that money could not buy. And yet when the bracelet went missing, when Claire's voice dripped with accusation, Alexander had done nothing. He had let Rosa stand in the cold foyer, eyes wide with hurt as security escorted her out. He had told himself it was cleaner that way, that one maid didn't matter in the machinery of his life, that the whispers at the country club, the boardroom glances, were more dangerous than one woman's dignity. Now that same woman was curled against an airport wall, her children pressed to her side, and Alexander's heart, so used to being locked behind glass, pounded with something that felt dangerously close to shame. One of the children stirred, a girl with dark curls, her hand reaching blindly until it found Rosa's coat. She mumbled, "Mama," and nestled closer. Rosa's eyes flickered open at the sound, groggy at first, then sharp as she registered the noise around her. She looked down at her children, smoothed their hair, and then her gaze lifted, straight into his. For a moment, the world went silent. No boarding calls, no footsteps, no voices, just that stare. Recognition flared instantly in her eyes, followed by something colder, harder, not surprise, not even anger, but the quiet certainty of a wound that had never healed. Alexander opened his mouth, but no words came. He who could command boardrooms with a glance, who could bend politicians with a signature, stood mute before the woman he had once cast aside. Rosa's lips parted, just enough for a whisper to slip out, low and sharp as broken glass. "Don't." Her voice carried years of silence, years of endurance, years of nights spent just like this, on floors not meant for her, in corners where no one looked. It was not a plea. It was a command. Alexander froze. Around them, the world surged on, travelers rushing to their gates, children crying, coffee spilling, announcements droning. But between them, a storm had already broken, silent and fierce. He had found a ghost from his past, and she was staring at him like a man who had never deserved her name on his lips. And deep inside, for the first time in his life, Alexander Grant wondered if all the power he carried in the world could make right the silence that had once destroyed her. The airport buzzed with its relentless rhythm, but Alexander barely heard it. He stood rooted a few feet away from Rosa, his throat dry, his palms prickling with the kind of unease he hadn't felt since he was a boy. She had told him not to speak, and yet her silence thundered louder than any confrontation could. Her eyes, still fixed on him, carried the weight of a story he had tried to forget. No, a story he had buried. But memory is never really buried. It waits. In that moment, the polished marble floors of the VIP lounge, the gold-plated cufflinks on his wrist, the empire balanced on his signature, none of it mattered. What mattered was the chuz. E-Night Rosa had disappeared from his life, stripped not by fate but by his cowardice. He had told himself it was nothing, that she was just another employee, one among dozens. But his memory betrayed him now, clawing its way back to the surface. He saw her moving through his house years ago, carrying fresh linen into his mother's bedroom, humming softly in Spanish. He saw the way his mother's rigid face would soften whenever Rosa entered the room. He remembered coming home late one night, exhausted from a board meeting, and finding Rosa asleep in a chair beside his mother's bed, her hand still resting on the quilt, as though protecting her even in sleep. She had been more than a maid. She had been a presence, a warmth his mansion had never known before. Then came the bracelet. Claire had been the one to notice it missing, a delicate piece of jewelry she claimed had belonged to her grandmother. Alexander could still hear her voice dripping with scorn as she called Rosa into the living room. The entire staff had been gathered like an audience for a trial. Claire had accused her calmly at first, then with sharp venom, every word designed not just to question, but to humiliate. You think no one notices the way you linger? You think because you've charmed his mother, you can charm your way into more? Rosa had stood there, her face pale, her voice shaking as she insisted she hadn't touched it. He remembered the way her hands twisted in front of her apron, the way her eyes searched his face as though he might defend her. And he had said nothing. He had let the silence stretch, long and unbearable, until Claire's smirk told everyone what the verdict would be. Rosa had left that night with nothing but a small bag and the weight of disgrace pressed onto her shoulders. He had watched from the top of the staircase, his jaw tight, telling himself it was better not to interfere. Said it's better to keep the peace, better to keep his reputation unscathed, and he had turned away. Now here she was, on the floor of an airport, her children curled against her like fragile anchors, and the memory seared through him, her wide eyes that night, the way she had looked at him, silently asking for help, and the way he had pretended not to hear. Rosa. The word slipped out of him before he could stop it. Her head snapped up, and for a brief second her eyes glistened, not with softness, not with recognition, but with fire. "You don't get to say my name," she whispered. The children stirred at the sharpness in her tone. One of them shifted, and as the blanket slipped, Alexander caught sight of the boy's face. His breath faltered. The child's features were achingly familiar, not identical, but echoes of himself when he was young. The slope of the nose, the stubborn set of the mouth. Alexander's chest tightened, but he said nothing, not yet. Rosa's jaw clenched as she adjusted the blanket over her children. "You let her destroy me," she said softly, so only he could hear. "You let her throw me out like I was trash, and you—" Her voice cracked before she caught it again. "You never even asked if it was true." Her words struck deeper than any boardroom defeat ever could. Alexander felt his knees weaken, his carefully constructed armor bending under the weight of her truth. He opened his mouth, desperate to explain, to defend himself. But what excuse could he offer? That he had been afraid? That he had chosen silence over courage? That reputation had meant more to him than her dignity? The announcements continued to echo overhead, flight numbers and boarding times, indifferent to the storm that raged between them. Rosa pulled her children closer, her body curved like a shield, her voice low but sharp. "You left me with nothing, and I built a life out of that nothing. Don't you dare stand here now and look at me as if you remember who I was." Alexander's heart pounded in his chest. The truth he had avoided for years stood before him, breathing, defiant, unbroken, despite everything he had let happen to her. He felt the ground shift beneath him, the air thin, as though the world itself demanded an answer he wasn't sure he had the strength to give. And for the first time in decades, the billionaire who could move markets with a word found himself speechless. Alexander stood frozen, the world around him a blur of motion. Travelers rushed past, families dragging sleepy children, businessmen glued to their phones, young couples clutching boarding passes with nervous excitement. But none of it mattered. His eyes were fixed on Rosa, and the weight of her words pressed on him like an iron chain. He had faced hostile takeovers, courtroom battles, and government inquiries. He had sat across from men who wanted to crush him and walked away with their empires in his pocket. Yet here, standing before the woman he had once turned away from, he felt powerless. "Rosa," he tried again, softer this time, almost a plea. Her gaze was steady, sharp as glass. "I told you not to." She shifted slightly, adjusting her children against her lap, as if reminding herself of the only things that mattered now. The little girl's curls spilled over her arm, and Rosa smoothed them gently, her touch tender, protective. He crouched down, lowering himself from the height that had always separated him from others. The polished shoes, the tailored suit, the aura of invincibility, all of it meant nothing on the cold airport floor. He tried to catch her eyes, but she kept them trained on her children, her jaw locked. "I was wrong," he said, the words heavy and unsteady, foreign in his mouth. "I should have defended you. I should have stopped it." A bitter laugh escaped her. It was quiet, but it cut deeper than a scream. "Stopped it? You stood there, Alexander. You watched. Do you remember?" He closed his eyes and the memory surged again. The night, the cold foyer, Claire's sharp voice, Rosa's desperate gaze. Yes, he remembered every detail. "I do," he admitted, his voice breaking. Her eyes finally lifted to his, and for a moment he saw not just the woman she was now, but the younger Rosa, the one who had smiled faintly when she tucked his mother's quilt. He one who had stayed up through the night with no complaint, the one who had given dignity to a house that lacked it. But the warmth was gone. What stared back at him was steel. "You chose silence," she said, "and silence is betrayal." Alexander's chest burned. He wanted to explain, to tell her how he had felt trapped, how Claire's poison had seeped into every corner of his life. But the truth was uglier. He had been afraid, and Rosa deserved more than excuses. The boy stirred then, his head rolling slightly against Rosa's lap. His eyes fluttered open, dark, alert, far too old for his age. He blinked up at Alexander, curiosity flickering across his small face. For a heartbeat, Alexander felt his world tilt. The boy's features were familiar in a way that made his breath catch. He looked away quickly, terrified of the thought that dared to rise inside him. Rosa noticed the flicker in his eyes. She pulled her children closer, her movements sharp, defensive. "Don't," she whispered again. This time, it wasn't just about her name. It was about everything. The past, the pain, the fragile life she had built out of the ruins he had left her with. "I don't want your pity," she continued, her voice low but firm. "I don't need your guilt. We survived without you. We don't need saving now." The words hit him harder than any boardroom defeat. For so long, Alexander had believed his wealth, his influence, his empire could fix anything. But here was Rosa, reminding him that some wounds could not be bought away, some lives could not be rewritten with money. He swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "I'm not here to pity you. He stopped, searching for words, for honesty, for something real. "I can't walk away this time." For a long moment they stared at each other, the airport spinning indifferently around them. And then Rosa shook her head, her eyes glistening but steady. "You already did." It was a blow sharper than any accusation, because it was true. He had walked away once and the damage had been done. Alexander rose slowly, his chest heavy, his mind racing with questions he couldn't yet ask, with truths he wasn't ready to face. Rosa turned her gaze back to her children, shutting him out as completely as if he'd never been there at all. But deep inside, something in him shifted. For the first time in years, Alexander Grant wasn't thinking about markets, mergers, or profits. He was thinking about a woman he had failed, and the children who slept against her side, and about the part of himself he had long ago abandoned with her. And though Rosa had told him to leave, every fiber of his being screamed that this time he couldn't. Alexander walked away, but his steps were uneven, heavy as lead. The terminal's bright lights blurred, the polished announcements of flight departures echoing like hollow chimes in his ears. He told himself to go back to the lounge, to the safe cocoon where his assistant waited with a briefcase full of documents and where no one could remind him of who he had been. But his legs didn't obey. He moved through the crowd, blending for once into the stream of ordinary people. He could still see her in his mind, Rosa, hunchin' it over, shielding her children like a fortress made of flesh and bone. The bitterness in her voice still rang inside him. You already did. He stopped near a window, his reflection staring back at him. Alexander Grant, the billionaire, the untouchable. But the man reflected was pale, eyes haunted, lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time in years, he didn't see power in himself. He saw a coward who had once chosen silence over justice. His phone buzzed. His assistant's voice came through, calm and efficient as ever. Mr. Grant, the jet is fueled and waiting. We need to leave within the hour if you want to make the London meeting. He should have said yes. He should have turned his back and gone. But instead, his gaze drifted down the corridor toward Gate 17. His heart pounded. Delay the flight, he muttered, and ended the call before his assistant could protest. He returned slow but steady until the sight of her stopped him again. Rosa hadn't moved far. She sat with her children, her back against the wall, her head tilted in exhaustion. Her son's small hand was curled in her coat, her daughter's cheek pressed against her side. They looked fragile, yet safe because she had made it so. Alexander hesitated, then walked closer, each step deliberate. Rosa's eyes opened, narrowing as they landed on him. She straightened, her exhaustion hidden behind defiance. Didn't I tell you to leave? Her voice was sharp, though quiet enough not to wake the children. He lowered himself again, careful this time, his eyes level with hers. I can't, he admitted, his voice low, steady, vulnerable in a way he hadn't allowed in years. Her jaw tightened. Why? What do you want from me? To ease your conscience? To parade your charity for the world? The word stung, but he didn't flinch. No, I don't want to parade anything. I can't undo the past, Rosa, but I can't ignore it either. Not anymore. Her laughter was bitter. Undo the past? You think money can wipe it away? You think the years I spent scraping for food, the nights I tucked my children in on concrete floors, the jobs that paid pennies, you think that can be erased by your guilt? He shook his head. No, I know it can't. His voice broke slightly, and he leaned closer, the truth spilling out in ragged pieces. I failed you. I failed myself. I've built towers out of steel and glass, but I've been living in ruins. And seeing you here tonight, he swallowed hard. It shattered everything I thought I knew about who I was. Her eyes glistened, though she blinked quickly, unwilling to let him see her falter. You were a coward, she whispered. Yes, he said, the word heavy but unflinching. I was. Silence fell between them, thick with everything unsaid. The boy stirred again, and Alexander's gaze involuntarily dropped to his face. That same flicker of familiarity returned, a thought so dangerous he barely let himself touch it. Rosa noticed. Her hand tightened protectively on her son's shoulder. Don't, she said sharply, almost panicked. Don't you dare look at him like that. Alexander's breath caught, but he forced himself to meet her gaze. Rosa, he said softly. Are they? Her hand shot up, silencing him. Her eyes burned with a mix of fury and fear. They're mine, she hissed. That's all you need to know. The words sliced clean, final. But Alexander felt the truth clawing inside him. The resemblance wasn't imagined. He knew it in his bones, in the way his chest tightened, in the way the boy's eyes had looked at him with a flicker of curiosity that felt like a mirror. He wanted to press, to demand answers, but he stopped himself. Not now, not like this. Instead, he nodded slowly, painfully. Then let me help you. Not because of guilt, not because of them, because of you. Rosa stared at him, her eyes searching, weighing his words. For the first time, her defiance wavered, just a crack. But then she pulled her children closer, burying herself back in silence. Alexander rose, his body trembling. He didn't know what came next. All he knew was that he wasn't leaving, not this time. And as he stood there, one truth settled over him like a storm breaking open. The empire he had built had never truly been his greatest responsibility. Rosa, and perhaps the children she carried with her, were. And he would not walk away again. The announcement for an international flight boomed over the intercom, but Alexander didn't hear it. He was still rooted near Gate 17, his pulse pounding, his body locked between the life he had always known and the one that now threatened to unravel before his eyes. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, a steady vibration demanding his attention. He pulled it out, saw his assistant's name glowing on the screen, and for the first time in years, he pressed decline. The act was small, but it felt like detonating a bomb inside his world. Alexander Grant did not miss meetings. He did not cancel flights. His time was orchestrated to the minute, his movements tracked like a head of state. But tonight, in the glow of the airport terminal, with Rosa huddled against the wall and her children sleeping like fragile secrets, none of it mattered. He sank into a chair a few feet away, not close enough to crowd her, but near enough to show he wasn't leaving. For once, he had no plan, no strategy, just the raw certainty that walking away would haunt him for the rest of his life. Rosa noticed. Her eyes opened, narrowing as they met his, suspicious, weary. "You're still here," she murmured, her voice edged with disbelief. "Yes," he said simply. "Why?" The question was sharp, almost accusing. "Because I can't get on that plane," he replied. "Not while you're here like this." She shook her head, the corners of her mouth tightening. "You think sitting in a chair changes anything? You think staying will erase what happened?" "No," Alexander admitted. His voice was quieter now, almost stripped bare. "But it changes me, and maybe that's the only place I can start." Rosa scoffed, but something in her eyes faltered for the briefest moment. She looked away quickly, smoothing her son's hair, as though reminding herself where her loyalty lay. Minutes bled into half an hour. The airport moved around them, luggage wheels rattling, tired announcements droning, people hugging their goodbyes and rushing toward beginnings. Yet between them, time slowed. Alexander reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek, black leather notebook. It was the kind he carried everywhere, filled with numbers, schedules, strategies. But the last page was blank. He tore it carefully and pulled a pen from his breast pocket. For a moment he hesitated, his hand trembling in a way it never had when signing billion-dollar contracts. Then slowly he began to write. When he finished, he folded the paper in half and set it on the seat between them. "I know you don't want my money," he said, his eyes steady on hers. "But this isn't charity. It's acknowledgement." Rosa looked at the folded page but didn't touch it. Her eyes flicked to his, sharp, suspicious. "What is it?" "A promise," he said, "and a key." Her fingers hovered but pulled back. She didn't trust it. She didn't trust him. And he couldn't blame her. Just then, a cluster of flight attendants walked past, their laughter echoing, and Rosa stiffened. She shifted her body to shield her children instinctively, her chin tilting high with the pride that had carried her through years of survival. Alexander saw it, and it pierced him, the way she refused to bow, even when life had crushed her down. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low, urgent. "Rosa, I've spent years surrounded by people who smile in my face and stab me the moment I turn. I've stood in boardrooms full of men who would sell their mothers for profit. But when I look at you, here with nothing but your strength and your children, I see more dignity than I've ever seen in any of them." Her lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. She just stared, caught off guard, her armor trembling. And then, as if on cue, her daughter stirred awake. The little girl blinked, her wide eyes darting from her mother to Alexander. For a long, innocent moment she studied him, and then, with childlike simplicity, she asked the question Rosa had dreaded all along. "Mama, who is he?" The air between them cracked like glass. Rosa froze, her breath catching. Alexander's throat tightened. The girl's small voice had shattered the fragile wall Rosa had built between past and present. Rosa brushed her daughter's curls back quickly, whispering, "No one, sweetheart. Just no one." But Alexander knew, and deep down, Rosa knew he knew. His heart hammered as he whispered, almost to himself, "Not no one. Not anymore." And in that moment, for the first time in decades, Alexander Grant had no empire, no shield, no distance. Just a truth rising like a tide he could no longer hold back. Rosa's daughter stared up at her with wide, questioning eyes, her small hand tugging gently at the sleeve of her coat. The innocence of the question, "Mama, who is he?" hung in the air like a bell that could not be unrung. Rosa's lips trembled as she pressed a finger to her daughter's hair, trying to hush the moment away. But her silence only deepened the tension, thickening it until it felt like the entire terminal had stilled to listen. Alexander's heart hammered. He had faced hostile investors, courtroom battles, even governments trying to topple his empire. But nothing had ever unraveled him like this child's gaze. Her eyes were bright, soft, and hauntingly familiar. He felt it deep in his chest, the undeniable echo of something that belonged to him yet was never his. "I'm no one," Rosa whispered quickly, clutching her daughter close. "He's no one. Go back to sleep." Her voice was too sharp, trembling with a desperation that betrayed her. The girl frowned, confused, but obedient. She nestled back against her mother, her eyelids heavy with sleep. Rosa kissed her forehead fiercely as if sealing the truth away once more. But Alexander couldn't let it go, not now. He leaned forward, his voice raw, his carefully curated calm gone. "Don't say that, Rosa. Don't call me no one." Her head snapped toward him, her eyes blazing. "You don't get to decide what you are to us," she hissed. "You don't get to walk back into my life and claim a place you forfeited years ago. You don't get to want now, when you chose silence then." Her words struck like blows, but Alexander didn't retreat. His hands trembled against his knees, his voice steady but breaking at the edges. "I chose silence because I was weak, because I was a coward. I've lived with that every day. But seeing you here, Rosa, seeing them." His eyes flicked to the sleeping boy and girl, then back to her. "I can't keep pretending I don't know." Rosa stiffened, her body curling protectively around her children. "You don't know anything," she snapped, but her voice wavered, and Alexander caught it. He leaned closer, his tone soft but unrelenting, like a tide pressing against the shore. "Then tell me I'm wrong. Look me in the eye and tell me they're not mine." Her breath caught. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. For the first time, Rosa looked shaken. Not by the past, not by poverty, not by the years of struggle, but by the truth clawing its way to the surface. Tears welled in her eyes, and she turned away sharply, her jaw clenched, her shoulders trembling. Alexander felt his throat tighten. He wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, but he didn't dare. Instead, he whispered, almost pleading, "Rosa, please." The silence stretched, unbearable. Then Rosa exhaled, a sound half sob, half surrender. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "They're mine," she said hoarsely, her voice breaking. "Mine to protect. Mine to raise. Mine to keep safe from men who abandon what they create." The words hit him like a knife, but they also revealed the truth hidden between them. He closed his eyes, pain searing through him, yet with it came a strange clarity. They were his. And Rosa's refusal to admit it outright wasn't denial. It was defiance. It was her way of saying that whatever his blood meant, he hadn't earned the right to claim them. Alexander opened his eyes slowly, his vision blurred with tears he hadn't shed in years. His voice was steady when he spoke again, but his whole body shook with the weight of it. "Then let me earn it." Rosa finally turned, her eyes wide, shining with anger and disbelief. "Earn it?" she spat. "You think fatherhood is something you can earn like a business deal, like closing a contract?" "No," Alexander said firmly, shaking his head. "It's not. But I can try. I can show up. I can stay. I can do what I should have done all those years ago." Her eyes burned into his, but her silence told him what her words refused to admit. She wanted to believe him, but she couldn't risk it. Not yet. The little boy stirred then, blinking awake, his small face turning toward Alexander. Their eyes met. For a fleeting second, it was like looking into a mirror, into a past Alexander had long since buried. And the boy spoke, his voice soft, curious. "Mama, is he family?" The question struck harder than anything before. Rosa froze. Alexander's breath caught. And in that fragile, dangerous silence, Alexander knew. The next words out of Rosa's mouth could change everything forever. Rosa's son rubbed his sleepy eyes, his small voice echoing louder than any boarding a no. Ents meant, "Mama, is he family?" The words cut through the air, piercing her like a blade she had spent years bracing against but never wanted to face. Her arms tightened around him instinctively, pulling him close as if shielding him from the truth itself. Her daughter stirred again beside her, blinking awake, now curious too. Two pairs of innocent eyes turned toward her, waiting. Children had no patience for half-truths. They wanted simple answers. And Rosa knew there was no simple answer here. Her lips parted, but nothing came. She could not bear to say no, because their faces carried shadows of Alexander that even she could not deny. And she could not say yes, because to her, family was not blood. It was loyalty, presence, protection. And Alexander had given her none of that. Alexander sat motionless a few feet away, his chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths. Every muscle in his body urged him to speak, to claim what his heart now screamed was his. But he didn't. Not yet. For the first time, he realized that fatherhood wasn't about declaring, it was about waiting, listening, proving. Rosa swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "He's someone I used to know." Her daughter frowned, confused, but her son tilted his head, studying Alexander with startling intensity. Children saw truths adults tried to bury. Something unspoken passed between the boy and the man, a flicker of recognition, even without words. Rosa shifted quickly, trying to close the moment before it broke her. "Come," she whispered to her children. "Lie back down, we'll be leaving soon." But Alexander couldn't hold his silence anymore. His voice cracked as he spoke. "No, you're not leaving, not like this." Rosa's head whipped toward him, fury flashing in her eyes. "You don't get to decide where we go." "I know," Alexander said, his hands open, his voice raw. "I don't get to decide anything. But I can't let you walk out of this airport and vanish again. Not when I've seen them, not when I know the truth now." Her daughter clutched Rosa's sleeve, whispering, "Mama, what does he mean?" Rosa's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to push him away, to keep her children safe from the storm of his presence. But deep inside, buried under years of scars, something else stirred, a part of her that longed to stop carrying the weight alone. Alexander leaned forward, his voice low, steady, almost pleading. "I'm not here to take them from you. I'm here to stand with you, to stand for them. I walked away once. I will not do it again." The conviction in his tone startled Rosa. For the first time, he didn't sound like the billionaire who had dismissed her, or the untouchable figure in expensive suits. He sounded human, broken, and maybe, just maybe, sincere. The boy sat up straighter, staring at him. "Why are you crying?" he asked softly. Alexander blinked, realizing tears were sliding down his face. He let out a shaky laugh, choked with emotion. "Because I just realized what I lost, and what I might still have, if your mama lets me try." Rosa's chest heaved, torn between anger and something far more dangerous. Hope. She had sworn never to give him that power again, never to let him back into the fragile world she had built for her children. Yet here he was, stripped of all his armor, asking not for forgiveness, but for a chance. The terminal around them bustled with life, families reuniting, strangers rushing, voices over the loudspeaker, but in their small corner by Gate 17, time had slowed. It felt like the whole airport waited for her answer. Finally, Rosa spoke, her voice trembling but firm. "Words are easy, Alexander. Promises are easy. What isn't easy is staying, showing up, proving you're more than a mistake I made years ago." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Then let me stay, tonight, tomorrow, however long it takes. I'll show you." Her eyes narrowed, testing him, searching for cracks in his resolve. She had been abandoned once. She would not let her children suffer the same wound. But as she looked at him, his tears, his desperation, his uncharacteristic stillness, she saw something she hadn't expected. He wasn't here as the billionaire who could buy anything. He was here as a man who, for the first time in his life, couldn't buy what mattered most. Her son tugged her sleeve again, whispering, "Mama, can we trust him?" The question shattered her. She looked at their small, expectant faces, then at Alexander. The weight of years pressed down on her, but for the first time in a long time, Rosa realized the decision wasn't only hers anymore. The children were asking, the children were watching, and whether she wanted it or not, the door to the past had swung open, and there was no closing it again. The dawn light seeped through the tall glass walls of JFK as night bled into morning. The terminal was quieter now, the frantic rush of late-night flights replaced by the hushed shuffle of early travelers. Rosa sat rigid against the cold metal bench, her children curled tightly against her sides, their breathing steady and innocent. She hadn't slept a second. Not with Alexander sitting only feet away, his presence heavy, his gaze unwavering. Alexander hadn't moved all night either. His jacket rested across his lap, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled, an unfamiliar sight for a man who lived by immaculate appearances, but he didn't care. For the first time in his life, he hadn't been thinking about deals or deadlines or the next conquest for his empire. All night, his thoughts had circled around Rosa, the children, and the silent promise he had whispered in his heart, "I will not walk away again." The first sign of morning life came in the form of a security officer making rounds. His eyes flicked to Rosa and her children, lingering on their rumpled coats and the blanket too thin to fight the chill of the terminal. He sighed, clearly debating whether to ask them to move along. Before he could speak, Alexander rose to his feet. "Excuse me," Alexander said firmly, stepping between the officer and Rosa. "They're with me." The officer glanced at him, taking in the suit, the expensive watch, the unmistakable air of wealth. His tone shifted immediately. "Oh, of course, sir. No problem." With a nod, he moved on. Rosa's eyes flashed with anger as she looked up at Alexander. "You don't get to step in like that," she snapped quietly. "We don't need you playing savior." Alexander swallowed, holding her gaze. "I wasn't saving you, Rosa. I was protecting what should have been mine to protect years ago. And I will keep doing it, not because you need me, but because they do." Her jaw tightened, her heart pulling in two directions. She wanted to believe him, but belief was dangerous. The children stirred then, waking to the pale glow of morning. Her daughter blinked up at Alexander, her small voice timid but curious. "Are you still here?" Alexander knelt down so he was level with her, his eyes softening. "Yes," he said gently, "and I will be. Every morning, if you'll let me." The girl tilted her head, studying him the way only children could, pure, unfiltered, searching for truth without words. Then, with a suddenness that stole Rosa's breath, the girl reached out and touched his hand. Just a small touch, but it was enough to make his chest ache with a joy he hadn't felt in years. Rosa turned away sharply, afraid her children might see the tears threatening her eyes. Alexander stood slowly, his voice steady now. "Come with me, all of you. I've already booked a suite at the airport hotel. You'll have a warm bed, food, privacy, no more cold benches, just one night. Then you can decide what happens next. No strings, no conditions." Rosa looked at him suspicious. "And then what? You'll vanish in the morning? Or worse, you'll try to take them from me?" His eyes widened, horrified. "Never. Rosa, I'm not here to take them. I'm here to earn the right to even be near them, to stand where I should have stood all along. If you walk away tomorrow, I won't stop you, but let me give them one night where they don't have to sleep on the floor of an airport. Please." The children looked between their mother and Alexander, sensing the weight of the decision. Her son, braver than his sister, spoke softly. "Mama, I'm hungry." The words pierced Rosa. She bit her lip, torn apart by pride and love. She had promised herself never to need him again, never to allow him to hold any power over her. But this wasn't about her. This was about the small hands tugging at her coat, the tired eyes blinking up at her. Finally, Rosa nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "One night. That's all." Alexander's chest rose with a deep, shaky breath. It wasn't victory, it was something far heavier. It was the fragile first step toward redemption. He extended his hand to her, not with the arrogance of a billionaire used to being obeyed, but with the humility of a man begging for a chance. Rosa hesitated, staring at the hand that had once built walls between them. Then slowly, she placed her own hand in his, not as forgiveness, but as fragile acceptance. As they walked together toward the hotel, the children clutching their mother's coat, Alexander glanced down at them, his children, and for the first time in years, the man who had conquered the world felt utterly unsound, prepared. Because this wasn't a business deal to win. This was a life to rebuild. And he knew the hardest part was only beginning. The sliding glass doors of the airport hotel parted with a soft hiss, releasing a wave of warm air that wrapped around Rosa and her children like an embrace they had not felt in years. The faint scent of polished wood, fresh linen, and brewing coffee filled the lobby. For Rosa, it was a world away from the cold steel benches and harsh fluorescent lights of the terminal. For Alexander, it was familiar terrain, one of many hotels his company owned, each detail a reflection of his empire. But tonight, this lobby did not feel like part of his kingdom. It felt like a test. The children clung to Rosa's hands, their wide eyes darting from the grand chandelier to the marble floor, their exhaustion battling their awe. They whispered to each other too softly for Alexander to catch every word, but he saw the flicker of wonder on their faces. For them, this was not luxury. This was safety. At the reception desk, the clerk straightened as soon as Alexander approached. "Mr. Grant, everything is prepared. The presidential suite is ready." Rosa stiffened. "We don't need a presidential suite," she whispered, sharp enough to cut through his pride. "A simple room is enough." Alexander turned to her, his voice gentle. "Rosa, this isn't about needing. It's about giving them a night they'll remember as warmth instead of cold. Let me do this. Not for you, not for me, for them." Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she tightened her grip on her children's hands as if reminding herself that she was still their shield, no matter where they stood. Minutes later, they stepped into the suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the awakening city beyond, lights flickering as dawn stretched across the skyline. Plush armchairs, a din, table, and two adjoining bedrooms awaited them, but the children's eyes went straight to the beds, large, soft, piled with pillows like clouds. Without hesitation, the boy let go of Rosa's hand and ran toward one bed, bouncing once before collapsing into the blankets with a giggle. His sister followed, burying her face in the pillows as though she could inhale comfort itself. Their laughter filled the room, bright and unrestrained. Rosa stood frozen at the doorway, her eyes wet. She had spent years teaching her children to survive with little, to accept the hardness of life without complaint. To see them laugh, carefree, unguarded, it was almost too much to bear. Alexander didn't say anything. He just watched, his throat tightening. He had walked past countless deals worth billions, but no victory, no merger, no acquisition had ever looked like this. Silently, he moved to the dining table and lifted the silver covers from trays the hotel had prepared, steaming scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, warm croissants, and hot chocolate. The smell drifted through the suite, and the children's laughter faltered into silence as they turned, eyes widening again. "Mama, food," his daughter whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. Rosa's chest ached. She wanted to refuse, to maintain distance, to show him she would not be swayed by his wealth. But hunger had no pride. Hunger only had need. And her children needed. "Eat," Alexander said softly, his voice breaking. "Please. For once, let them eat without worry." The children scrambled to the table, their small hands reaching hesitantly at first, then faster as Rosa nodded. They ate with an innocence that broke Alexander's heart, every bite reminding him of the years he had not been there to provide. He sat back, letting them take their fill, not touching a single plate himself. His hunger was of another kind. Rosa remained standing, arms crossed, her eyes flicking between her children's joy and Alexander's stillness. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but sharp. Do you think this fixes anything? A room, a meal, a soft bed? Do you think you can buy your way back into their lives? Alexander looked up at her, pain etched into his face. No, I don't. I know I can't buy what I lost. I can't buy their trust. I can't buy your forgiveness. All I can do is show you, over and over, that I'm not leaving, that I'm here to stay. The sincerity in his voice unsettled her. It was not the voice of the man she remembered years ago, the man who had left her with nothing but scars. This was a man stripped of power, naked in his regret. Her son paused between bites and looked up at her, then at Alexander. Mama, can he sit with us? The room fell into silence. Rosa's heart clenched. The decision wasn't just hers anymore. It was theirs. Her children were asking, their innocence pulling at the walls she had built. Slowly, Rosa nodded. One meal, she whispered. Alexander's breath shuddered out of him as he pulled out a chair. He sat at the edge of the table, his movements careful, almost reverent. The boy slid his plate toward him, offering a piece of bread with a smile. You can share. Alexander's hand trembled as he accepted it. In that moment, he realized it wasn't the bread that mattered. It was the gift, the first crack in the wall that separated him from them. As the children giggled and ate, Rosa stood watching, her heart at war. She wanted to protect them from disappointment, from heartbreak, from the man who had once abandoned her. But she could not ignore what she saw, a man trying not with money, but with presence. And that was something she had never expected from Alexander Grant. The morning sun crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the suite in a soft golden glow. Rosa sat at the edge of one of the beds, her hands folded tightly in her lap as she watched her children still sleeping, their small bodies tangled in blankets that had finally given them real rest. The peacefulness of their faces was both a balm and a knife, proof of what they had been missing all these years. Behind her, Alexander stood by the window, his suit jacket draped across a chair, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. He hadn't slept either. He had spent the night staring at the skyline, thinking of boardrooms filled with men who feared him, and now of two small children who had no reason to know his name, yet whose laughter had undone him more than any deal ever had. Rosa's voice broke the silence. It was steady, though heavy with a weight she had carried far too long. Why? He turned, his brow furrowed. Why what? Her eyes rose to meet his, sharp and unflinching. Why did you leave? Why did you let me struggle alone? Why did you let your own children grow up without knowing you? The questions landed like blows, each one reopening wounds he had hidden beneath wealth and power. Alexander's throat tightened, but he forced himself not to look away. Because I was a coward, he said quietly. Because I chose ambition over love and pride over responsibility. I told myself I had no time for family, that my empire needed me more than you did. But the truth is, I was afraid of being ordinary, afraid of failing. And in that fear, I failed you in the worst way. Rosa's jaw trembled, though her voice stayed strong. Do you know what it was like, Alexander? Do you know what it felt like to walk into a hospital with no money for medicine? To hear your daughter cry herself to sleep because she was hungry? To look your son in the eyes and lie, telling him everything would be okay when you had nothing left to give? You don't get to say you were afraid. You don't get to dress up your absence as fear. You abandoned us. Her words cracked like thunder in the suite, leaving silence heavy and suffocating. Alexander's chest heaved, shame burning in his veins. He walked closer slowly, as though each step weighed him down. You're right. I abandoned you. And I'll carry that shame until my last breath. I can't erase those nights. I can't undo the years you suffered because of me. But Rosa, I can be here now. I can make sure you never face another day like that again. Rosa looked at him, her eyes brimming but refusing to break. You think that's enough? You think you can just walk back into our lives with apologies and promises? I don't trust you. I can't trust you. Because the man I knew, the man who walked away, he didn't care. Alexander's voice dropped to a whisper, raw and almost pleading. I cared, Rosa. I cared so much that I buried it under steel and glass and numbers, pretending it didn't exist. But last night, watching them laugh, watching them eat without worry, it tore me apart because I realized what I had lost, and I will never forgive myself for it. Her hands shook in her lap as her anger collided with exhaustion, with memories of loneliness, with the sight of her children finally resting in comfort. She wanted to push him away, to guard herself against the hope threatening to bloom. But then she saw his eyes, not the cold, calculated eyes of the billionaire she once knew, but the hollow, desperate eyes of a man finally stripped bare. Her voice softened, though it wavered. If you mean what you're saying, Alexander, then prove it. Not with hotels, not with sweets or meals or gifts. Prove it by staying. Prove it by showing up every day. Because if you disappear again, if you break their hearts, I swear it, we'll destroy them, and I won't let you do that. Alexander's breath caught. He nodded once, firm, like an oath etched into stone. Then I will stay, not because I want to clear my conscience, but because I don't deserve another chance, and I'm still asking for one. At that moment, the children stirred, their sleepy voices filling the air with a fragile innocence that made the heaviness of the conversation fall silent. They called for their mother first, as they always had, but then the boy's voice drifted toward Alexander. Will you still be here when we wake up tomorrow? Alexander's chest tightened. He crouched down beside the bed, brushing a lock of hair from his son's forehead. Yes, he whispered. Every tomorrow. The boy smiled faintly before drifting back to sleep. Rosa's eyes met Alexander's, full of warning, but also something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Uncertain hope. And for the first time since he had walked away all those years ago, Alexander felt like maybe, just maybe, he had taken the first true step toward earning the right to call himself their father. The morning unfolded slowly, as though the world itself knew something monumental was about to happen. Rosa moved quietly around the suite, helping her children dress, while Alexander sat at the edge of the armchair near the window, his hands clasped tightly, his mind spinning. He had made promises in the dark, promises whispered to two small children and to the woman whose heart he had shattered. But now daylight had arrived, and daylight demanded proof. By mid-morning, Rosa gathered the children's few belongings into a worn canvas bag. She moved with a quiet efficiency born of years of survival, but her eyes never stopped flickering toward Alexander, gauging him, waiting to see whether his words of the night before had weight. He rose, buttoned his jacket, and approached her with a steadiness she had never seen in him before. There's something I need to do, he said, his voice low but certain. And I need you there when I do it. Rosa frowned. What do you mean? Instead of answering, Alexander placed a hand on his son's shoulder, the other on his daughter's, and led them all out of the suite. Down in the lobby, the hotel staff stiffened at the sight of him. The billionaire who owned the building rarely appeared in such personal ways. But today, there was no entourage, no assistants, no press team, just him, Rosa, and two children holding her hands. When they stepped outside, cameras clicked. Alexander's name had power, and his sudden appearance at the entrance of his own hotel was enough to draw attention. Reporters who had been camped out nearby rushed forward, their microphones outstretched. Mr. Grant, what brings you here? Who are the woman and children with you? Is this a new business deal or something personal? Rosa froze, her instincts screaming to turn away, to hide her children from the flashbulbs and shouting voices. But Alexander did not flinch. He stepped forward, raising a hand for silence. To Rosa's shock, the crowd obeyed. Billionaires spoke in press releases, not in raw words, but Alexander's presence had always carried gravity, and today his voice was heavier than ever. For years I built my empire on the illusion of strength, he began, his voice carrying over the restless crowd. I told the world I was untouchable. But last night I was reminded of the truth. True strength is not in skyscrapers or in wealth or in the fear you command. It is in the family you love and in the people you refuse to abandon. The reporters murmured, their pens scratching, their cameras flashing faster. Rosa's heart pounded in her chest. She tried to tug at his sleeve, whispering, Alexander, stop, you don't need to. But he gently pulled away, his eyes locking onto hers. Yes, I do. Turning back to the cameras, he continued, his voice raw. This woman, he said, gesturing toward Rosa, once worked in my home. She gave me loyalty, care, and trust. Things I did not deserve. I repaid her with abandonment. And these children are mine. I was not there for them. I chose my pride and ambition over them. And I was wrong. The crowd gasped, reporters nearly tripping over themselves to record every word. Rosa stood frozen, her children clinging to her sides, wide-eyed and confused. Alexander's next words trembled, but he did not falter. Today, I am done hiding behind power. I am claiming what I should have claimed years ago. These are my children. This is my family. And I will spend the rest of my life proving that I deserve a place in their lives. The press erupted in questions, their voices clashing in a storm of noise. But Alexander ignored them all. He turned, knelt in front of his children, and spoke softly enough that only Rosa and the little ones could hear. I can't promise the world will be kind after this, but I promise that I will stand between you and it. I promise that you will never wonder where I am again. Rosa's throat constricted, her chest heaving with the shock of it all. This was not the Alexander she remembered, the cold man who had vanished without explanation. This was someone different, someone who had just risked his reputation, his empire, his carefully built image, for the sake of truth, for the sake of her, for the sake of their children. Her daughter tilted her head, her tiny hand brushing against Alexander's face. So, you're our dad? She whispered, red, her voice trembling but curious. Tears stung his eyes, but he nodded. Yes, if you'll let me be. The little girl glanced at her brother, who gave a small smile and a shy nod. Then she whispered back, Okay, Dad. Rosa's hand flew to her mouth, a sob escaping despite her efforts to stay strong. For years she had carried the burden alone, never once allowing herself to hope for this moment. And yet here it was, fragile, imperfect, but real. Alexander stood, his hand hovering near Rosa's, waiting, but not forcing. I don't expect forgiveness today. I don't expect love tomorrow, but I will be here, every day after, until you believe me. Rosa stared at him, her heart torn open by anger, pain, and something dangerous, something she had buried long ago. Hope. Finally she exhaled, her voice barely more than a whisper. Then prove it, Alexander. Prove it. And as the flashes went off around them, capturing the moment for the world to see, the billionaire who once thought he owned everything realized that only now, kneeling in front of the woman he had wronged and the children he had lost, he had finally begun to own the one thing that mattered, his redemption. The world did not stay quiet after that morning. By the time Alexander and Rosa had ushered the children into a waiting car, the news was everywhere. Screens in the airport flickered with headlines. Billionaire admits to abandoning former maid and secret children. Social media exploded with judgment, disbelief, and, unexpectedly, curiosity. People who had once spoken of Alexander Grant as a ruthless titan of industry were suddenly talking about him as a man who had just ripped his own armor off in front of the world. In the car, Rosa sat pressed against the door, her arms protectively wrapped around the children. She refused to meet Alexander's gaze, though she felt his eyes on her. The silence between them was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of years of betrayal, grief, and now something far more complicated. Possibility. Rosa, Alexander finally said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. I know this feels like chaos. I know I've put you in a storm you didn't ask for. But I promise you, this time, I'll stand in it with you. She turned then, her eyes sharp and tired. Do you even understand what you've done? You've put them in the spotlight. They didn't ask for this. They didn't ask to be paraded in front of the world. Alexander's jaw tightened, guilt flashing across his face. You're right. But hiding them would have been another lie. I won't build a life with you on secrets. Not again. Her anger faltered at that because she knew deep down that his words were true. For years she had dreamed of him acknowledging them, giving her children the name they deserved. And now the whole world knew, but the truth still terrified her, because promises could shatter, and children's hearts could break. That night, after the children were asleep in the suite, Alexander held his phone in his hand, staring at the dozens of missed calls from board members, investors, and politicians. His empire was trembling. He could see it in the angry headlines about reckless behavior and unstable leadership. A year ago, he would have picked up the phone, ready to defend his reputation with steel in his voice. But tonight, he turned the phone face down on the table and walked to the balcony. Rosa joined him a moment later, her arms folded tightly against the cool night air. She didn't look at him, but her presence beside him was enough to make his chest ache. "You've started something you can't undo," she whispered. "I don't want to undo it," he said quietly, his gaze on the city below. "I want to build something new, something honest, with you, with them." Her laugh was soft and bitter. "You think it's that easy? That one confession erases years of pain?" "No," he admitted, turning to face her at last. "But it's the first brick, and I'll lay the rest one by one, if you'll let me." The silence between them stretched, filled only by the hum of the city. Rosa closed her eyes for a long moment, her lashes damp with tears she wouldn't let fall. Finally, she turned toward him. "You say you'll stay. Then stay. Prove it in the small things. Be here when they wake up. Be here when they're sick. Be here when life is ordinary, not just when it's dramatic, because that's what you took from them, ordinary days with their father." Her words sank into him like an anchor, steadying him in a way no boardroom ever had. He reached for her hand but stopped just shy of touching it, leaving the choice to her. For the first time in years, Rosa didn't pull away. She let his hand brush against hers, barely, cautiously, but it was enough. A fragile beginning. And deep inside, Alexander knew this was only the start of his real empire, not the one made of glass and steel, but the one made of love, trust, and the quiet, everyday presence of a her and a man who refused to walk away again. The storm hit harder than anyone expected. Within 24 hours, Alexander's confession dominated every major network. News anchors dissected his words. Morning talk shows replayed the footage on loop, zooming in on the moment his daughter touched his face and whispered, "Dad." Social media was split down the middle. Half the world condemned him as a hypocrite who had hidden a secret family, while the other half called his confession the bravest thing they had ever seen from someone of his stature. By the second day, stock analysts predicted disaster. Headlines screamed, "Grant Global in crisis." Board members convened an emergency meeting and investors threatened to pull out. Yet for the first time in his life, Alexander didn't scramble to shield himself. He sat at the edge of the suite bed watching his children eat breakfast, listening to the sound of his daughter's giggle and his son's soft questions about the world outside. For the first time he realized, if everything fell apart, he could still stand, as long as they stood with him. But Rosa wasn't convinced yet. She had lived through storms before, and she knew how ruthless the world could be. She watched Alexander with guarded eyes, torn between the man she once loved and the man who had walked away. The first test came 3 days later. A journalist tracked them down outside the hotel, shoving a microphone toward Rosa while cameras blinded her children. "Miss," the reporter shouted, "how long did Mr. Grant keep you hidden? Did he pay you off? Were you just his maid? Or something more?" Rosa froze, clutching the children tight, panic rising in her throat. Before she could react, Alexander stepped in front of them, his voice sharp and cold, the old authority in him returning but redirected like a shield. "You will not speak to her like that," he snapped, his eyes burning into the man's. "You want answers? You talk to me, not to her, not to them. This is my mistake, not theirs." The crowd quieted, stunned, cameras clicked faster. But Rosa felt something shift. For years she had carried every insult, every doubt, every humiliation on her own. But here was Alexander, finally taking the blows that should have been his long ago. That night, She found him standing by the window again, the city lights flickering across his face. He looked tired, older somehow, but steady. "You shielded us today," she said quietly. He turned, surprise in his eyes at her words. "I should have been doing that all along." Rosa crossed her arms, her voice breaking despite herself. "Do you know how many nights I prayed you'd come back? How many times I told the children stories about a father who might never show up? You don't erase that with a press conference, Alexander." He closed the distance between them slowly, his voice low, raw. "Then let me erase it by staying, day after day. No speeches, no cameras, just me." For a moment, Rosa couldn't breathe. She saw the man she once loved standing before her, stripped of his pride, offering nothing but presence. It terrified her more than his absence ever had, because this time, if she let herself believe him, she couldn't survive another abandonment. The children stirred in their sleep then, and Rosa turned away, wiping her eyes. But deep down, something fragile had begun to grow. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the faint outline of hope. And Alexander knew. The real battle wasn't in the boardrooms anymore. It was here, in the quiet hours, proving himself in the ordinary ways she had demanded. It was the fight of his life, and for the first time he was ready to lose everything else if it meant winning this. The boardroom was nothing like the warm suite where his children laughed. It was cold steel and glass, designed to intimidate, and it always had. Alexander Grant had walked into this very room for decades with the confidence of a king, his footsteps echoing like thunder across marble floors. But today, there was no triumph in his stride. There was only resolve. At the far end of the table sat Victor Hale, his longest-serving board member, and the man who had once taught him to bury feelings under numbers. Around him, a dozen other directors whispered furiously. Papers shuffled, voices rose. The air reeked of tension. "You've jeopardized this company, Alexander," Victor began, his voice sharp and laced with disdain. "The markets are in free fall. Investors are calling this a scandal. Do you have any idea how much value has been wiped from Grant Global in 72 hours? Alexander took his seat at the head of the table, calm, steady, his hands folded before him. "I know exactly how much." "Then why?" another board member snapped. "Would you stand in front of the press and admit to something so damaging? You could have denied it, controlled the narrative, paid her off like you always have. Instead, you made yourself a spectacle. You made us a spectacle." For the first time, Alexander didn't flinch at the accusations. He leaned forward, his voice even, but charged with something new, something that unsettled them. "Because hiding the truth is what cost me my family in the first place. I won't build this empire on lies anymore, not at their expense." A murmur rippled through the room. Some scoffed. Others exchanged wary glances. Victor slammed a hand on the table. "This isn't about your feelings, Alexander. This is about billions, about shareholders, about stability. You're acting like a man who's lost control. And if you can't separate your personal life from our professional duties, then maybe you're not fit to lead." The words hung heavy in the air. A year ago, Alexander would have fought with numbers, with threats, with icy precision. But today, he rose from his chair, every inch of him radiating a different kind of power, the kind born not of fear, but of conviction. "You're right, Victor," he said quietly. "I have lost control of the man I used to be. The man who thought profit mattered more than people. The man who abandoned the only ones who truly needed him. If you think that man should come back, then you don't want me as your CEO. But if you want someone who will build an empire that actually means something, one that stands for truth, for family, for integrity, then you'll stand with me now." Silence swallowed the room. Some board members shifted uneasily, caught between fear of financial ruin and something they hadn't felt from Alexander in years. Sincerity. Victor sneered. "And if we don't stand with you?" Alexander's eyes hardened. "Then I'll walk. I'll take my name, my vision, and everything I've built, and I'll rebuild it from the ground up, with or without you." The room erupted in whispers, but Alexander didn't wait for approval. He gathered his papers, pushed in his chair, and headed for the door. For the first time in decades, he didn't care about the empire behind him. His empire was waiting in a hotel suite, two small children who had called him dad for the first time, and a woman whose heart he still hadn't stopped fighting for. And as the heavy doors shut behind him, the boardroom full of billionaires realized something chilling. Alexander Grant had just become more dangerous than ever, not because of what he owned, but because of what he was now willing to lose. The days that followed were not filled with grand gestures, but with the kind of moments that had once been foreign to Alexander Grant. For a man who had lived on the ticking of clocks and the buzzing of boardrooms, time suddenly slowed, and for the first time, he allowed it to. In the quiet of the hotel suite, mornings began not with reports or calls, but with the soft patter of small feet. His daughter, Lila, would climb onto his lap with her messy curls, shoving a crayon drawing in his face. "This is you," she'd say with pride, holding up a stick figure with wide arms and a smile too big for its head. His son, Mateo, would follow close behind, shy but curious, asking questions about the world that Alexander realized he'd never thought to answer for anyone but himself. He didn't know how to be a father in the way Rosa expected, but he started with the basics, making them pancakes in the morning, even if they came out burned at first. Walking them through the park in the afternoons, holding both their hands like they were his lifelines. Sitting with them on the carpet at night, building towers of blocks only to laugh when Lila knocked them down in triumph. For Rosa, it was disorienting to watch. She had spent years imagining him far away, cold and unreachable. And yet here he was, kneeling on the floor in a wrinkled shirt, his tie forgotten on the arm of a chair, listening intently as Mateo explained why his toy truck was the fastest in the world. But Rosa's heart was not so easily swayed. Late at night, after the children had fallen asleep, she kept her distance, guarding the pieces of herself that had been broken too many times. She reminded herself that Alexander was a man who thrived in storms, who made promises only to move on when the winds changed. And then one night, the test came. Mateo woke up feverish, his little body trembling as he whimpered in pain. Rosa jumped from her bed immediately, gathering cool cloths, whispering comfort as she had done 100 times before. She half expected Alexander to stay asleep like he once would have, but when she turned, she found him there, eyes wide, shirt half-buttoned, panic plain on his face. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice cracking. Rosa stared at him, stunned by the fear in his eyes. "We keep him cool. We watch his breathing. If it gets worse, we go to the hospital." For hours, Alexander stayed awake with her. He sat on the edge of Mateo's bed, his large hand cradling the boy's smaller one, whispering stories to distract him from the discomfort. Rosa watched him, her chest tightening. This wasn't the man who had once left her to face the world alone. This was a man trying, fumbling, terrified, but present. When the fever finally broke in the early hours of the morning, Alexander slumped back against the wall, his head in his hands. Rosa approached him quietly, placing a blanket over his shoulders. For the first time since their reunion, she looked at him not with anger, but with something gentler. "You stayed," she whispered. His eyes lifted to hers, red-rimmed with exhaustion. "I told you, I won't leave again. Not when it matters. Not ever." Something inside her cracked then. Not enough to heal completely, but enough to let a little light in. For Rosa, it wasn't about confessions or cameras. It was about this, the man who had once been absent now refusing to let go of her son's hand through the night. And as dawn broke over the city skyline, Rosa realized that Alexander Grant might truly be learning what it meant to build an empire, not of power, but of love, trust, and ordinary days that carried extraordinary weight.